Behind the Red Line. Episode 8. The West Mesa Bone Collector. The desert is a graveyard, but with no headstones. When the wind moves across the sand, it doesn't just shift dirt, it erases, and tracks, and footsteps, stories, lives. The land outside Albuquerque is like that. Endless stretches of sun-bleached dirt where nothing grows unless it's desperate enough to fight for survival. A place where silence sits heavy. A place people pass on the freeway without ever turning their heads. This is the West Mesa, a barren plateau on the far edge of the city, too dry for farming, too empty for tourism, too forgotten for anyone to care. But the desert remembered what the city did not. For years, it hid something beneath its skin. Not one life, not two, but 12. 12 human beings, 11 women and one unborn child, buried beneath shallow layers of sand, their bodies arranged in patterns only the killer understood. The wind tried to keep their secrets. The sand tried to bury their stories. And Albuquerque was not listening. Tonight, we walk into the desert. We walk toward the place where the earth gave up its dead. And we retrace the footsteps of a predator who has never been caught. This is Behind the Red Line. Episode 8, The West Mesa Bone Collector. Albuquerque in the early 2000s was a city split clean down the middle. On one side were the postcards, neon diners glowing under the night sky, Route 66 motels with buzzing pink signs, tourists buying turquoise jewelry and green chili burritos, a bright, sun-baked Southwest charm that looked warm and inviting from a distance. But the locals knew another Albuquerque, a harsher one. Especially in the International District, a place locals used to call the War Zone, though officials later begged people to use softer names. A place where trauma lived on the street corners, where addiction hung in the air like heat, where police sirens weren't alarming, just background noise. A place where women worked the streets because they ran out of options long before they ran out of hope. Shelters were overflowing. Drug markets were open air. Sex work wasn't just a job, it was survival. And survival came with rules. Don't walk alone at night. Don't get into cars with strangers unless you have to. Don't trust anyone too quickly. Don't expect help if you go missing. Women disappeared quietly in this part of Albuquerque, quietly enough that they slipped through the cracks without anyone sounding alarms. Some had families who begged police to search. Some had families who had given up. Some had no one left to fight for them. Some had been missing for months before anyone realized they were gone. The killer lived in the shadows of this divide, and the city's silence made his footsteps disappear behind him. The disappearances didn't start with a bang. They started like whispers. One woman missing, then another, then another. The kind of missing where a friend would say, "I think I saw her last week." The kind of missing where a mother would call police and hear, "She's an adult. She'll turn up." The kind of missing where a case file is just a single sheet of paper. Name, age, last known location, no photo. Most of these women walked the same streets along Central Avenue. They knew the same motels, the same dealers, the same hourly rooms, the same gas stations, where everyone gathered when the sun went down. And then, one by one, they vanished. Some were last seen entering cars at night, headlights briefly flashing across their faces before swallowing them whole. Some were last seen near motels, drifting between rooms. Some were seen outside convenience stores, pacing under flickering neon lights. Some simply melted into the dark. One of the women was 4 months pregnant. Her mother searched for her with a desperation only mothers understand. She handed out flyers, knocked on doors, begged detectives to help her, but the city barely looked up. Years passed, the list of missing women grew, and the killer kept walking the same streets, unseen. If someone had connected the dots early, the story would have been different. But no one connected anything. Detectives were overworked, caseloads piled up beyond what any team could handle, and missing women who battled addiction or worked the streets were routinely labeled as runaways, transients, or likely to return. There were no citywide alerts, no media coverage, no urgency. Families begged the police for updates. Some were told their daughters were probably off using. Some were told to call rehab centers. Some were told to check shelters. No one ever said there might be a serial killer, because no one believed the missing women were connected. No one saw the pattern, but the killer did. He identified the exact blind spot where women could disappear without consequences. And he used it. On February 2nd, 2009, the desert finally decided it had enough. A woman was walking her dog on a patch of dry land at the far edge of a construction site. Developers had plans to build hundreds of new houses, the kind with stucco walls and red tile roofs, the kind marketed as quiet suburban living. Heavy machinery had pushed mountains of dirt into unnatural hills. The ground was scratched open, and on that windy evening, something long buried rose back into the light. Her dog wandered off the path, sniffing intensely, digging at the ground. He growled, low and uneasy. The woman stepped closer to pull him away, and that's when she saw it. A pale shape sticking out of the sand. Just the curve of something. Smooth, off-white, not sharp like a rock, not jagged like debris. Something human. She froze. Her breath caught. It wasn't a stone. It was a bone. A human femur, part of it still covered in dry clay, part of it exposed like the desert was finally exhaling. She called the police. Officers arrived expecting maybe one body, a tragic end to a runaway, or someone who wandered too far. They didn't expect what came next. They didn't expect the earth to keep giving up bones. Investigators cordoned off the area. Anthropologists and crime scene teams arrived in heavy gear, carrying shovels, sifters, markers. They found one skeleton, then another, then another. By the third day, they knew they were dealing with something massive. By the end of the excavation, they had uncovered 11 women and 1 unborn child. The way the bodies were buried told a story detectives couldn't ignore. These women were not scattered by nature. They were placed, intentionally, softly, shallowly, not dumped in a pit, not tossed, arranged, like the killer kept coming back, like he had a ritual, like he had time. Some remains lay close to each other, as though buried during the same period. Others were spaced apart, forming a loose grid across the 92-acre site. Detectives found earrings, hair ties, clothing fibers, pieces of jewelry, fragments of lives that never should have ended in the sand. Families of missing women showed up to the site crying, shaking, waiting to hear if their daughters were among the dead. Some had last seen their daughters years earlier and spent every day since wondering what happened. Now they had answers, not closure, because closure doesn't exist in cases like this. They had truth, a brutal truth. And for the first time in years, the city realized it had a serial killer. The women of West Mesa were not statistics. They laughed. They dreamed. They had favorite songs, favorite foods, favorite memories. They were not defined by addiction or poverty or sex work. They were human beings. Some had fallen into addiction after trauma. Some entered sex work because they were trying to keep a roof over their heads. Some struggled with homelessness. Some fought every day to get clean. Some were mothers trying to get their children back. Some were barely adults themselves. Their families described them with aching love. She always smiled, even when life hurt. She had the biggest heart. She just wanted to be loved. She was doing better before she disappeared. She was trying to turn her life around. She deserved help, but the killer chose them precisely because the system didn't. He chose women society had decided were easier to dismiss, women whose cases wouldn't cause uproar, women he believed no one would look for. And for years, no one did. Detectives began piecing together a profile, not from the bones, but from the patterns. A man with patience, a man who studied the area, a man who understood how to move unnoticed in a community overlooked by police, a man who knew the desert, its silence, its emptiness, its ability to hide things for years. He hunted women between their mid-teens and early 30s. Many were Native American, Latina, or mixed race. Most were connected to the same streets. Almost all struggled with addiction or survival sex work. This was not the chaos of an impulsive offender. This was deliberate. This was organized. This was someone who kept returning to the desert with the confidence of a man who believed he'd never be caught. The name the media gave him didn't come from what he collected, but from what he left behind. The West Mesa Bone Collector. There were suspects, but suspects aren't answers, especially not in a city where violence was common and accountability was rare. One man, a local photographer, was known for taking pictures of vulnerable women. He had a violent past, a reputation for stalking. He died in 2009, the same year the bodies were found. Some believed his death explained why the killings stopped, but no evidence linked him to the Mesa. Another man, someone with a documented history of attacking sex workers, lived near the site. He was arrested years later for unrelated crimes. Police questioned him, searched his property. They found disturbing things, but nothing definitive. Then came the whispers of a cartel connection, trafficking routes, drug debts, punishment killings. But why bury the women gently? Why scatter personal items? Why space the bodies deliberately? Cartels don't bury with sentiment. The most haunting theory remains the simplest. A single man, quiet, local or semi-local, who walked unnoticed through Albuquerque's most vulnerable community, lured women one by one, and buried them with a method he refined over years. Someone who either left the state or died, or is still living somewhere, blending in perfectly. Someone who could be sitting in a diner, standing in a grocery store, or driving a truck across state lines while knowing he got away with murder. The story of West Mesa isn't just the story of a killer. It's the story of institutions that were supposed to protect these women and didn't. It's the story of missing persons cases closed too quickly, families dismissed because of their daughters' struggles, communities judged instead of helped, addiction criminalized instead of treated, police understaffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed. By the time the bodies were discovered, the killer's trail was years cold. Not because the killer was flawless, but because the system was flawed. He counted on that. He counted on people not caring. He counted on society turning its back on women who needed help the most. And he was right. Today, the West Mesa looks almost ordinary. Quiet houses, children playing, construction trucks coming and going, people walking dogs on dirt paths that wind through what used to be untouched desert. But beneath that ground, stories still sleep. Stories of women who were loved fiercely. Stories of women who deserved safety. Stories of women who deserved to come home. The land remembers them, even when the city tried to forget. And somewhere out there, either living, buried, or watching, the man who did this carries the truth. A truth he has never spoken. A truth he has never answered for. A truth the families deserve. The women of West Mesa were not disposable, not forgettable, not nameless. They were human beings who deserved protection, dignity, and compassion. Their final resting place should never have been a patch of desert behind a future subdivision. Their stories should never have ended in silence. Tonight, their voices rise from the sand. Their truth stands taller than the man who tried to bury them, and their memories live on, here in this documentary, where we refuse to let the desert hide its secrets any longer. This is Behind the Red Line. Episode 8, The West Mesa Bone Collector.